Coming to you live, but not really. It is all pomp and no circumstance with Ryder Richards on LetUsThinkAboutIt.com, the amateur hour you should never tune into.
Welcome back. This is Ryder Richards with Let Us Think About It. So the world and humans are full of complex contradictions. No surprise. And on this podcast, I'm trying to work to make it more understandable, more relatable. So I read and write to shed some light and to relieve some anxiousness and prepare you to encounter the world in a better way. So a couple of months ago, I finished Amartya Sen's book, Identity and Violence. Amartya Sen is a Nobel Prize winner, and the book came recommended through the Knowledge Project Book Club, which I'm a part of. So I found that there was essentially one idea that ran through the book, and then the rest of the book sort of showcased it in various iterations and sort of how it cascaded out. So Sen shows numerous examples of how cultures have constructed alternate histories, ignored evidence, and manufactured debased beliefs so that they can continue to subjugate, colonize, and turn people into others. Now, the main concept is to perpetuate violence upon another, you must reduce their complexity, claiming one trait or category as somehow dominant. And then this allows you to abstract them, which in turn, since they're no longer real, they're just an abstraction, you can reduce them into an other. Now, from there, violence and mistreatment is going to happen because these are no longer people, they're just objects or obstacles. So now this is a really great and profound concept that we need to internalize. But also, we need to not internalize letting other people label us. So the example that I've heard is where if, say, somebody walks up to you and says, "Your orange mohawk is really dumb." Well, since you don't have an orange mohawk, you don't really let that insult have any traction in your life because, obviously that person's crazy. Yet if somebody says to you, they just walk up on the street, maybe they don't even know you and they can say, "You're a bad parent." Or maybe they say, "You're not good at your job." Because it's closer to home, we're very prepared to let this comment stick. We're basically primed to give this comment credence by society and by ourselves. So this becomes like Velcro and it just attaches and we let it stick. And then we take it into ourselves and we hurt ourselves with this comment somebody else made. Meanwhile, this orange mohawk comment, it just bounces off. We don't give it any traction. So Terry Crews, the actor, artist, comedian, he said recently in his interview with Tim Ferriss that when people call him the N-word, he just shrugs it off because he knows he is not that. He is so many things and so far beyond that simplification that it just bounces off. If anything, he feels sympathy for the other person who just revealed their own depth of pain. So, what I want to do in this episode is really quickly map out the concept we've already introduced of reductive identity that allows violence. Then I want to relate it to Buddhist concepts and then talk about David Foster Wallace and then reference again our old buddy Matthew Crawford as a way to sort of compare solutions here. Because at the end of the day, not only do we want to realize our tendency to stereotype and reduce people, but we want some solutions for how to keep us from doing it repeatedly. Even when, at times, people can be the absolute worst. Part 1. Reducing Identity. The major takeaway from Identity and Violence is that identity is multifaceted, and that we identify as multiple things to multiple people at various stages in our life. Now, this is a fairly obvious notion that we often forget. You can be an American Jew and a scientist and a vegetarian and a part-time heterosexual who maybe is also addicted to painkillers. You could be a sister, a mother, a spouse, a proud citizen of Mexico, a CEO who owns your own company, of course, and a roller derby fanatic who is hyper-religious and shoots guns at UFOs, all in your spare time, right? Because we're never just one thing. Besides race, nationality, familiar relations, and career, we are also unique in our interests and our temperaments. And to make it all more complex, it all changes over time as our relation to the world changes. So this is easy enough to say, but it's hard to practice in daily life. Amartya Sen, he discusses that to perpetuate violence, it really comes from being able to reduce the identity to one primary feature. For example, your race as a Jew, or is that your religion, or is that your nationality? I don't know. But once reduced, we can then attach to this single feature very negative demeaning traits. This is a type of abstraction, making the complex stupidly simple. And from simple, which humans love, we convert people with this trait into an object. They are then lesser, barely human, merely instruments for sadism. And what this means is that there's a way to dissolve empathy, and that's through reductionism. And to maintain and reinforce that reductionism, we use an us versus them propagandistic narrative, and these narratives take generations to unravel. For instance, nationalism and race. We could even look back at the treatment of the Irish or the Japanese or the Chinese when they first came over to America. Or after Pearl Harbor, the Japanese were interned in prison camps. How about slavery of African Americans, which became paired with racist ideas, and even scientists who you knew was brilliant, like Watson, who ended up discovering the double helix, said black people were genetically inferior. So he let the reductive racist narrative, this us versus them, shape his scientific views. Now, how about religion? How about the treatment of Muslims after 9/11? Oh yeah, but we had precedents for that, right? Because of the way we treated them back in the 11th century Crusades? Or how about not giving an entire culture credit for some sort of genius invention, like a zero or a machine or writing? Instead, Englishmen would create outlandish fictions requiring a ton of work on their part to uphold their supposedly genetic and intellectual supremacy. What tends to happen is groupthink, group dynamics, and once again, this us versus them. And either out of fear or for power or because of some sort of psychological instability or insecurity, othering people seems to simplify the world. But one of Sen's key points is the lengths you have to go to in order to maintain your false simplifications are not only irrational, costly, and harmful, but the warped cruelty of your falsity inspires people, especially when it's claimed as the truth. And that damages all of mankind.
Part 2. I, it, thou.
Sen says, repeatedly, that by reducing identity to one dominant trait and ignoring the rich complexity of entanglements we all have, we're led to violence and cruelty. Now, to further complicate Sen's reductionist identity leads to violence, is to look at how the broader us versus them stems from the smaller I versus you. To reduce people to them and then abstract them further into an object, we first must manufacture a lie. How about an illusion that separates you from reality? Now, this ends up aligning, oddly enough, with Buddhist philosophy, where a self that exists independently of experience is illusory. That's an illusion. We have all, of course, stumbled across the Buddhist notion that attachment brings suffering, and we should only really be pursuing unity. But of course, we're most attached to our ego. We tend to identify with our thoughts and mistake the self for the I. Which is, of course, typically some sort of little voice in your head, maybe it's a little tyrant between your ears who is, of course, scared and berating you at the same time and telling us lies. For more on that little guy, you should go back and check out Step 56 on embodied perception and cognition. Of course, Alan Watts would say about something like this:
Life and reality are not things you can have for yourself unless you accord them to all others.
Or basically, you cannot have freedom unless everyone has freedom. Now, before Alan Watts, who was around in the 60s, a German guy named Martin Buber wrote a book called I and Thou, Ich und Du, where he addresses this twofold tendency, this binary we return to over and over again. And Buber says we address the world as I and it, or I and thou. I'm going to call it I, it, I, thou. The easiest way to say this is that we spend about 90% of our interactions as I, it. And this is where I exist and I engage with objects around me. That's a chair, that's a pencil. So this is an experience and a sensation in which I'm engaging with the world. Now, to engage in I, thou, it requires you to truly relate to another, though not as an object, but as a whole relationship. Buber says that you cannot take out of this person when you're relating to somebody else a single aspect. When you're in a conversation, you can't reduce them down to their hair or their eyes or a pattern of speech, because to do so turns them into a sub-identity, an object, where you do not fully relate, but you objectify. So how do we begin to relate to others as a thou beyond their sub-identities? Maria Popova says, speaking of Buber, to address another as thou requires a certain self-surrender that springs from inhabiting one's own presence, while at the same time stepping outside of oneself. Only then does that other cease to be a means to one's own ends and become real. So one more time, notice this surrendering of the self, the moving from self-identification and thought to fully present cohabitation. In this moment, there's no concept of ends means objectification. The other becomes thou, not it, in this process. This is how they become real. So how do you not reduce someone's identity and end up perpetuating violence upon them and others? Well, you have to actually surrender or release yourself, or basically vulnerably submit to being open without self-identifying. Then we can actually fully co-inhabit the present with another. So I, thou, yeah, when you're practicing it, this is not some abstract mental model or it's a theory of how people and objects work, but this is a relational experience.
Part 3. Mind Games.
For the last few episodes, we have been walking through Matthew Crawford's book, The World Beyond Your Head. And the repeated thread is to engage in reality. It's to step outside of yourself and your mental models and to be attentive and to find yourself through submission to reality. So you can see how now all of this is syncing up, right? Where violence is made possible by ignoring the complexity of reality in favor of a simplistic solution, a lie, an illusion, which allows you to go from treating people as interconnected thou to treating them as an it. So we go from a whole relational reality to a fragmented false objectification. So what are some practical paths we can take here? Well, being aware, of course, is step one. But let's also look at a solution by David Foster Wallace in his This is Water commencement speech. And then we're going to look at Matthew Crawford's critique or rejoinder to this. And I think it's going to further map out the conundrum that we find ourselves in, which, at least to me, is when we attempt to generate empathy internally, abstractly, rather than as Buber says, where we take our stand in relation to him to fully experience him.
But most days, if you're aware enough to give yourself a choice, you can choose to look differently at this fat, dead-eyed, over-made-up lady who just screamed at her kid in the checkout line. Maybe she's not usually like this. Maybe she's been up 3 straight nights holding the hand of her husband who's dying of bone cancer. Or maybe this very lady is the low-wage clerk at the motor vehicles department who just yesterday helped your spouse resolve a horrific, infuriating red tape problem through some small act of bureaucratic kindness. Of course, none of this is likely, but it's also not impossible. It just depends what you want to consider. If you're automatically sure that you know what reality is and who and what is really important, if you want to operate on your default setting, then you, like me, probably won't consider possibilities that aren't annoying and miserable. But if you've really learned how to think, how to pay attention, then you will know you have other options. It will actually be within your power to experience a crowded, hot, slow, consumer hell-type situation as not only meaningful, but sacred, on fire with the same force that lit the stars. Love, fellowship, the mystical oneness of all things deep down.
When we are angrily disgusted by others, we must play mental games to manipulate ourselves into feeling empathy for them. This, in part, is so we can be good people. It even helps us feel good about ourselves and to relate to others in the world. We all want to be good people, but we often become captive to our own thoughts, not really doing the hard work to pay attention, to be aware, and less identified with our incessantly rambling inner monologue. And as of course you all know by now, as Matthew Crawford says, as David Foster Wallace says, as Taoism and Buddhism say, as Iris Murdoch says, as Martin Buber says, it is because we're living in our own heads, which isolates us from others. To counter David Foster Wallace, the solution is not to play mind games, manipulating yourself so that you more favorably perceive the world, and thus mentally and of course privately, secure your position in relation to the world as somehow a healthy, happy individual. Crawford says, quit playing the mind games. Either distract yourself from those thoughts by paying more attention to reality and engaging with the real world, really just becoming aware, or take the direct, honest, and simple approach. Have a conversation with that person. Talk to the lady in the checkout line or at the DMV. The goal is action or movement into the world, not a retreat into your fallible, lying, game-playing head. This activity, interaction, relation, it short-circuits the tendency to stereotype and reduce others, which of course is what leads to ends means objectification, which is violence. An actual relationship, I-thou, leads to real empathy made through communal interaction. Not some abstract empathy that simultaneously somehow traumatizes you and removes you further from the world. It's kind of sad, but I know several people who have so much abstract empathy for Black people and Ukrainians and the poor that they're in real pain, and they increasingly cut themselves off from being able to have real empathy for the people that they love that are right in front of them. Sure, keep your empathy, but activate it with those around you. Allow it to let you live fully rather than keeping you in your own head and strangling you. Don't stay in your head. Participate by relating. All right, thank you very much for your time. I really hope you enjoyed the show. And if you did, I would love it if you'd hop on to letusthinkaboutit.com and subscribe to get our monthly newsletter. On the website, we have written versions of the show, and we're now also on YouTube if you prefer to stream a video with me making goofy faces. Now, the show, of course, takes time and energy and passion to keep afloat, and really thank you. Thank you so much for being a listener and letting me know that this work is valued. And of course, a shout out to my amazing subscribers who are donating $5 to keep me on track as I, of course, attempt to squeeze life wisdom into these little episodes. But could you do me a favor? I mean, could you share this episode with one person? As you were listening, I bet someone popped into your mind. I know I had several people in mind as I was making it. Next episode, I'm going to be looking at gambling. And of course, not if it's good or bad. I mean, you should know by now that I'm not that kind of prude, but really what it does to us, the human individuals, inducing a type of autism that is proudly championed by libertarian states as our right. You have the right to do this to yourself. Now, this may seem like odd country to drift into, but it also aligns with our ongoing concern with individuality, manipulation, autonomy, and freedom. And of course, lest we forget, if you want daily wads of fuzzy wisdom delivered straight to your inbox, check out bellybuttonlint.blog. That's right, bellybuttonlint.blog. All right, many thanks and stay safe. Until next time.